Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and thank you for joining me for a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite topics of ufology, which is, of course, humanoids. I find these cases endlessly fascinating, and there are so many of them. They have so much to teach us about the extraterrestrial presence on our planet. The title of today's episode is I Was Studied Like a Guinea Pig, 7 Very Weird Humanoid Encounters. I think all humanoid encounters definitely have high strangeness to them, but the 7 cases I've picked for you today absolutely do, and some have unique details I've never heard before. I've got cases from all over the world for you, including Argentina, Brazil, Canada, England, Finland, and 2 from the United States, including Michigan and New Hampshire. All different types of humanoids, some multiple witness cases, just some amazing evidence to support some of these cases as well. And yeah, incredible high strangeness. I think the high strangeness shows that we still have a lot to understand about what exactly is going on here. So let's get started. First case I want to talk about today, I call Tell No One. That is a direct quote from the ETs. This occurred a long time ago, August 27, 1942. This is outside of Escanaba, Michigan, in a very rural area. And this case is so amazing. This case first appeared in the volume 31, number 1, 1985 issue of Flying Saucer Review in an article titled A Terrifying Car Trip and Other Experiences. I don't think it's ever been published anywhere else. It presents the first-hand eyewitness testimony of a lady known only by her initials, GLK, so I've given her the pseudonym Gina. She was born in 1914 and calls herself, quote, an ordinary housewife. She lived with her husband and 2 children on a 200-acre farm near Escanaba, Michigan, a very rural area just north of the Ford River and not far from the town of Hyde, where many of her extraordinary experiences have taken place, and there are quite a few of them. Her first unusual experience involved repeated sightings of a bluish, kind of a ghost light, not far from her own. But her first really unusual encounter occurred on June 3, 1942. She was 28 years old. She, her husband, their child, and 3 other adults were traveling in their 1937 Chevrolet from their home in Escanaba to St. Paul, Minnesota. Now, after driving many hours, they decided to pull off at a rest stop in Green Bay, Wisconsin to get a little sleep, and everyone was still in the car. One of the adults was the driver, and as Gina says, and I quote, "No sooner had we got nicely settled down when the car seemed to start moving backwards from its parking place. Then slowly it began to go forward, around the building, not taking the same street along which we had come, but into an entirely different direction, until we came to a street lined with large trees on either side. I could see very many headlights of oncoming cars moving towards us. I asked the driver to please be more careful when meeting the cars, because he hadn't even switched on his own headlights, because the light from above, which seemed to be accompanying us and shining down through the trees overhead, gave us more than enough light by which to travel. I had no idea that it could have been a UFO hovering some 100 feet above us. It was a strange light beaming down from an object which turned out to be disc-shaped and almost lilac in color. The object stood perfectly still, as if it were suspended from the air. It must have been about 15 to 20 feet in diameter. It made no noise. Then, in a matter of a split second, it seemed to be moving, slowly moving our car from its parking place. And soon we were traveling along at a pretty high rate of speed, with the large ball of light hovering above us, leading the way through the crowded streets. So at first, Gina had no idea what was happening. She had no way to explain it. And the weirdest part was, she was the only one in the car who seemed to be aware of all of this. As Gina says in her own words, everyone in the car seemed to be sound asleep, for nobody showed any sign of being aware of what was happening. The driver was sound asleep, both his hands hanging onto the wheel and his head right down, resting on them. Several times I asked him, "Where are we going?" For I thought it had been our plan to rest for a few hours before taking off again. But I never got any response from him, nor did he even raise his head. They always say that you should never awaken a person when he is in a nightmare, so somehow I felt that the driver must know what he was doing. It seemed like forever, riding down that brightly lit street, then suddenly the car swerved off the main thoroughfare and headed into a more deserted area. Now this road was leading us away from the city lights, and the only light now was from that huge globe above us that seemed to have been following all this time. So finally, still moving of its own accord, the UFO led their car down a narrow road into a remote farm pasture next to an old windmill. And it was now about 2:30 a.m. Everyone was still asleep, so Gina, not knowing what else to do, just lay back and slept herself. It was around 4:30 a.m. that everyone woke up, and they were all astonished to find themselves in a completely unknown location. As Gina says, it was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. No one had the slightest notion of how we had got there. That was the beginning of it all, but there was more to come. It was just 3 months later, around midnight on August 27, 1942, when Gina suddenly woke up to find herself walking down a pathway away from her farm in Escanaba. She heard her dogs barking in the distance, but felt compelled to keep walking. And as she says, "When I came to within 100 feet or so of the creek, I noticed a large, bright light shining down from the treetops. It shone as bright as day. Slowly, I kept walking on, as if drawn by some unseen guiding hand. Suddenly, I looked up and saw a strange man approaching me. He was on the other side of the creek, which was very narrow, so that indeed one could hold hands across it. He gently took my hand and greeted me by name. Now Gina found herself replying, 'I have been looking forward to meeting you for a long time.' The man answered her softly, 'Do you remember seeing me before?' And Gina said, 'Not to my knowledge.' She now watched as the man took what appeared to be a pad and pencil and began to study her and take notes. This made her somewhat uncomfortable. She looked down and was surprised to see that she was barefoot, wearing only her blue nightgown. Looking back up at the man, he looked normal. His clothes, however, were unusual. As Gina says, he looked to be about in his middle 30s, a round face, fair complexion and wavy hair of a sandy color and cut in our style. His eyes seemed to be grayish blue, and he wore a bright red satin shirt, open at the neck, with full sleeves gathered at the wrist, tight-fitting brown ski pants, and a heavy pair of combat boots. It made me wonder that our own men did not dress in this style. Now at this point Gina heard other voices, and looking towards them, where she had seen this bright light, she was amazed to see other people and a large flying saucer. And as Gina says, "I saw people moving about there around a large dome-shaped craft underneath the light and about 50 feet from me. A young girl was sitting on a huge rock near the creek combing her hair. She seemed to be quietly and contentedly watching something in the water. Her long blonde hair fell around her shoulders and back, and she wore a loose flowing gown of a beautiful sheer material that seemed to radiate all the hues of blue as the rays of light fell upon her from above." Now Gina was not sure how long she was there with this man and the other people in the flying saucer, but as she said, quote, "It seemed as though I must have spent an eternity there." Finally, the man looked at her and said, "You may leave now, but tell no one of your visit here with us tonight." And at that, Gina simply left the site and began the quarter-of-a-mile walk back home. And as Gina says, "It was after 2 a.m. when I got back home and sat on the edge of my bed, feeling rather dazed and a little tired. I just could not think. Nothing made sense. I had a burning sensation on my feet, and, as I looked down at them, I saw they were covered with dust and sand. My husband, who I thought had been asleep, turned to me and asked, 'Where have you been? You have been gone almost 2 hours.' So Gina now knew the experience wasn't a dream, and she got further confirmation when her neighbor said that at 2 a.m. that night, her dog began barking furiously, and looking out the window, she saw somebody walking down the road, presumably Gina. Gina, of course, denied that it was her, but now curious, she went back to the location in the forest to investigate. And as Gina says, I followed the path ahead of me, and there, right before my eyes, were the tracks as plain as daylight. In the brown dirt were the prints of my bare feet, and a few feet distant were the prints of a man's heavy-soled boot of about size 10 or 11. A cold chill ran over me. So that was the end of that encounter, but there was one more weird incident, at least one more. 23 days later, on July 24, 1965, around 11 p.m., everyone had gone to bed when suddenly everyone in the house heard this strange music. As Gina says, we seemed to be awakened by the most beautiful music. It seemed to be so soft and sweet, and its strains seemed to be coming from everywhere, such as no earthly music could do. I said to my husband, I could listen to this sort of music forever. We listened for a while, expecting it to stop, but it went on and on. I got out of bed and went around the house from room to room, checking to see whether anyone had forgotten to switch off their radio or had left the TV on. But everything was off. Clearly, the music had not been coming from within our house. Then my husband suggested that it might be coming from a car parked outside, and I replied, the car would have to be parked very near to our bedroom window to have music coming in this loud and clear. Finally, we decided that the music was coming from right outside below our bedroom window, which was some 10 feet or so from the ground. So I stepped out into the hall from our bedroom and glanced out through the bathroom window, and I heard low voices and laughter. And as I reached the window, a flash of light passed the window, and I heard an odd sound, like a whole swarm of honeybees just taking off. All the time, while we were lying there listening and not moving, the music had continued to play, and we had heard faint sounds from outside the house. But the minute I got up and was about, it all came to an end. Now their house was fairly isolated, and the source of the music was definitely a mystery, but the next morning, Gina and her husband were shocked by what they discovered. As Gina says, early next morning, we walked out behind the house to see if there were any signs to show that something had been there during the night. And there, right before our eyes, was an area on the ground about 12 feet in diameter of a burnt brown color, which looked as though something might have hovered there above it. All around this brown, burnt, circular area, the grass was well trampled down, as though by many heavy footsteps. It looked as though, once again, we had experienced a visitation from who knows where and who knows what. Having gazed at that bright light, I felt for several days as though my eyes had been affected, blinded. So over the next few years, they continued to have sightings. On March 26, 1967, they saw a small orange-colored disc-shaped craft hovering about 3 feet above their driveway. It stayed for only a few seconds and then took off. Later, on October 31st, 1969, her children were walking home and said that they were followed by a, quote, huge object. It followed them all the way to the railroad tracks near their home, and then it took off. But as they arrived home, this object was now right over their house. And as Gina says, the children were scared to death and rushed into the house. It remained overhead for a short while and then disappeared into space. Now, years later, in 1973, Gina, now age 59, had a final sighting. On February 8, 1973, at 8:30 p.m., she looked out her window and saw, as she says, quote, a bright, round, silvery-looking object sailing across the sky just above the treetops to the north of our house. Its silver color was vividly bright against the dark blue evening sky. That may be my favorite case in this compilation, though there are a few others that I find equally fascinating. But this one is so interesting in so many ways. If you read the witness's firsthand testimony, which I include, you see that she's very obviously honest and sincere. And how strange is it that she found herself awake while this car is being dragged for miles and everyone else in the car is apparently asleep. I know of a few other cases like this, but that's exceedingly rare. Also really rare are cases of musical UFOs, and yet we have one here. So that's also really interesting. And the fact that so many of the family members have had encounters makes me think that this is a family that is probably being closely monitored or followed by ETs for whatever reason. But we do know that contact is generational, so that seems to be what's going on here. But what an incredible case that is. So many cases of people just coming upon landed UFOs, and this one is just amazing in so many different ways. Lots to unpack there. All right, now let's move to the next case, which is another one I just found really poignant. I call this one, "This is no joke. They are real." This one occurred one evening in October 1955 in a very rural area outside of Peterborough in New Hampshire. This is a multiple witness case. I love the witness. He's, again, very clearly honest and sincere. It provides a very detailed testimony of an amazing encounter. This case appeared in the April-May 1985 issue of the QFOS Associates newsletter. It is a first-hand letter sent to J. Allen Hynek from a UFO witness, now a priest, but at the time of his encounter, he was a 15-year-old student at the St. Joseph's Carmelite Miners Seminary located just north of Peterborough in New Hampshire. The witness is anonymous, so I'll just call him Joseph. As Joseph says, "I have decided, with no little inconvenience to myself, to submit to you my account of what happened to me. I doubt that that will do anything more for the field of UFO studies than to fill up another file folder. But I must deposit my story with a responsible person, namely you, Dr. Hynek, so that I can get it off my mind. This is, to the best of my ability and memory, what happened." So it was one evening around 8 p.m. in October 1955. Joseph had just completed his chore of washing the dishes, and he left the kitchens to go to the building some distance away with the classrooms. This was about a quarter-mile away. So he's walking outside, and as Joseph says, "I glanced toward the open fields looking towards Mount Monadnock, and I saw 4 glowing bluish-white ovals. One very large one seemed to be on the ground. 3 much smaller ovals hovered over it in a delta formation. I cannot describe my emotions at the time, except to say that I was awestruck, yes, but at the same time, I was able to maintain my presence of mind. I stared at the sight for 2 or 3 moments, and then I realized that I must have witnesses. I ran down to the classroom building and burst into the recreation room. Now inside the room were about 12 to 15 young men, aged 15 to 21. They were all student priests for the Carmelite order. They were sitting there chatting, playing games, and Joseph screamed out to them, "Come quick! Flying saucers!" So they looked at him with disbelief, and a few said, "Yeah, sure." But Joseph said, "Come on! I am not kidding. This is no joke. They are for real." And someone else asked, "Where?" Joseph replied, "Up in the field," and he ran out of the room, screaming at them, "Come on! Come on!" As Joseph says, 4 or 5 of the guys followed me. We ran out the door into the road, and there they were, hovering over the schoolhouse, slowly moving one by one from the southwest field to the northeast. By that time, everyone was screaming. Father Joseph came out and stood there with his mouth hanging open. They moved so slowly, we were able to walk under them as they moved, and we followed them into the forest. We stood and watched as each of them, one by one, glided soundlessly over us. It was then that I noticed that they gave off a glow, just like a streetlight, bluish-white. So everyone there was absolutely amazed and awestruck at this incredible sight, and as Joseph says, I remember looking at Mike McQuire, and his hair was standing up on end. So was everyone's. The hair on my arms was sticking up like porcupine quills. And as the object moved over us, I noticed how the shadows of the trees lengthened and shortened. The largest of the UFOs moved very slowly. The other two came behind it at intervals of perhaps 1 minute, very slowly, but the fourth UFO seemed to linger behind for a few extra moments. Then it zipped past us at a rapid speed. While they were over us in the forest, it was as bright as day. After they were gone, it was pitch black again, because there was no moon that night. We tried to follow, ran down the road a ways, but they were long gone. This, however, is not the full story of Joseph's encounter, because he also saw humanoids. But that part of his story was very hard for him to share with researchers, as unlike the UFO sighting, he had no other witnesses. As Joseph says, there is an addenda that I will add to the end of this recital that I do not wish to include right now because I fear it might somehow distort the story. I will, however, sign this portion of the story because this much I can swear to, and I do have witnesses. This much I can and will swear to. I don't know if the others are still around, but some of those who were there that evening might be able to add on to what I have said. Father Dennett was one of the witnesses. This much of the story I do add my name to, and I do swear that these are the facts as I remember them. So Joseph now continues to share the part of the story that, as he says, I cannot swear to, nor do I insist that anyone believe it. This addendum is not part of the story I would submit to the public, since there were no witnesses. As Joseph says, when I first sighted the four craft, the largest of the four was on the ground, and it was not glowing as brightly as the other three, it seemed. It was more of a dull silhouette, and standing beside it were 3 or 4 individuals, also in silhouette. And I don't know why, but to this day I still have the feeling that they were extremely agitated about something. Then, after a few moments, they seemed to become aware of me. That was when I ran down to the schoolhouse. But I did get that feeling that they were aware of me only after I had been standing there for some moments. And then they became very excited. Unfortunately, Joseph does not describe the humanoids in any great detail, nor does he know what became of these figures as he ran away to get more witnesses. Still, there was one last detail of high strangeness that might be familiar to those who know the after effects of close encounters with UFOs and humanoids. And again, I'll just quote Joseph directly. As he says, the strange part about this is the fact that I did not remember this until some time after the event. And then, when I did remember, I derided against the notion because I thought it was just my own imagination trying to make something of the whole episode. But I add it because it is what I seem to recall. This is as far as I hope to go with it. But should you want to question me about it, I would be most willing. I will swear by this statement if you can find another of the witnesses to back me up. But on my own, I cannot hope to withstand the assault of questions without backing. Very, very weird. I think that would qualify as an encounter over a school. As you may know, I wrote a book about schoolyard UFO encounters. There are well over 100 of cases of this kind, which I think are essentially displays where UFOs are showing themselves to children intentionally as sort of a publicity campaign to announce their presence. So I do think that's what's probably going on here, but I'm just presenting the facts as we know them so you can make up your own mind about it. Another really interesting aspect to this case is the witness did not even remember at first seeing the humanoids. That comes across a lot in a number of humanoid cases, and particularly on-board encounters, this sort of amnesia and missing time aspect. And that really makes me wonder if perhaps there wasn't more to this encounter than the witness can consciously remember. There's no direct indication of missing time, but yeah, I do wonder. And it's also really poignant because you can see that the witness was really struggling to share that aspect of his encounter. He was perfectly fine saying that he'd seen UFOs, but when it came to seeing the humanoids, he was much more reticent to report that aspect. That is a pattern I've noticed. The closer the encounter, the less likely is a person going to report it. And that's especially true if a person sees humanoids. So I think an important and pretty obscure case. I think probably all these cases are pretty rare. I'd be surprised if you've heard of any of them, including this next one, which I call, I have never run so fast in my life. This one occurred on July 13, 1971, in Canada actually, Notre Dame du Nord in Quebec, Canada. It is a single witness case and a very unusual humanoid. I'm not sure it's even extraterrestrial, but let's just get into it. This case comes from the French-Canadian researcher Jean Ferguson, and it was published in the French-language UFO magazine, UFO Quebec. The witness is Monsieur Gaetan Paquin. It was around 11 p.m. on July 12 or 13, 1971, that Gaetan was driving and was just minutes from his home located in Notre Dame du Nord in Quebec. This is in Canada. At the time, there was a power failure in the area, and the sky was also overcast as it had just finished raining. So there was almost no light. It was very dark. And as the witness approached his home, he saw something white, a white form, dart across the road in front of him. But it went so fast that he could not really distinguish what it was, and he didn't pay much attention to it. He drove a little further ahead, arrived home, and as he was walking into his home, he turned his head to the left, and he could hardly believe his eyes. Standing a short distance away was a very strange humanoid, apparently the same white figure that he had seen moments earlier. As the witness says, it was a completely white being, human in form. It had a pointed nose, almond-shaped eyes, and a small pursed mouth, a little puckered mouth. It had no hair and nothing resembling clothing. Its height did not exceed 1.2 meters. That's about 3 feet 9 inches. But as the witness continues, I felt very uneasy, for it was very, very visible in the darkness. This was quite astonishing, as there was absolutely no light, given that there had been a power outage that night. Its body appeared to be composed of a transparent substance. I had the impression that I could have passed anything right through it. I could have, for instance, thrown a stone at it, and it would have passed right through. Now the witness did not see any UFO, nor did he hear any strange sounds or smell any strange odors. But the sight of this strange creature was enough to scare him very badly. In fact, he panicked and fled the area as fast as he could. As he says, I have never run so fast in my life. In fact, he was so frightened that he didn't even bother to look back to see what had become of the being. One of the weirder humanoid cases for sure, seeing that it was transparent. I mean, maybe this is a ghost. Honestly, I don't think so, because what kind of ghost is going to have dark slanted eyes and just look not quite human? It's very weird that it ran across the road right in front of the witness, kind of like a Bigfoot does sometimes. I don't know. I mean, it's just odd. A very short figure, which again fits with a lot of humanoid cases. There was a study done which showed that over, I think it was 70% of humanoid reports involve beings that are 4 feet or less. So maybe this was an extraterrestrial, maybe not. The witness did not see a UFO, so it's very hard to draw any conclusions. And again, it's a pretty brief case in terms of the amount of details it has, but certainly unusual and I think important. I think all these cases are important because each one is a piece of the puzzle, including this next one, which I call, I never took my eyes off of them. This one occurred one evening in January 1983 in Cadishead, England. This is in Greater Manchester. This is an amazing case in so many different ways. Yes, a single witness case, but it's got some really unusual evidence to it. This very unusual case first appeared in issue number 105 of the Northern UFO News in an article by researcher Ron Sargent titled Two Extraterrestrial Vicars and a Motorbike. The witness is known only by his initials, E.D., so for the purposes of this segment, I'll just call him Edward. One evening around 9 p.m. in January of 1983, Edward had received a used motorbike and was eager to try it out. He had not yet paid the required road tax, so he decided to push the motorbike onto the road that borders the Manchester Ship Canal in the town of Cadishead in Greater Manchester, England. Now, before riding the motorcycle, he decided he needed to relieve his bladder. So he propped up the motorbike on its stand and he wandered off into the bushes and trees to do his business. About 2 minutes later, he emerged from the trees, only to now see two strange figures standing over his motorcycle. Thinking immediately that these two figures were planning on stealing his bike, he shouted to them and swore at them. Weirdly, the two figures ignored his shouts, so he quickly moved closer and was amazed to see that these two men looked like vicars, wearing dark gray or black suits with white collars. And he immediately felt a wave of shame at having shouted and sweared at them. And as he got closer to them, this shame turned to astonishment as he realized that these two men were absolutely identical in appearance, like twins. They did not look normal. Ed froze in disbelief. The two men briefly looked at Ed and smiled, and then turned their attention back to the bike. Weirdly, they were stroking the seat in perfect synchronous movements. At this point, things became even stranger when Ed reported what UFO researchers call the Oz effect. Ed said that time seemed to slow down and his memory of the events became distorted. He said it seemed like hours were passing in moments, and he watched as the two men left the motorbike and began to walk towards a small craft that was sitting on the ground a short distance away, which Ed had not noticed until this moment. He said the craft was somewhat bullet-shaped, vertically oriented, and sat on 4 landing legs. The craft appeared to be about 10 feet high and 6 feet wide. The landing legs were about 5 feet long and 1 foot wide. Now, on one side of this craft, this object, there was a red symbol or insignia depicting an upwards-facing horizontal bracket symbol on the bottom, an upside-down U on the top, and an upwards-facing arrow in between these two emblems. Now, in his account to UFO researchers, Ed explained that his attention was riveted onto the two strange men. As he says, "I never took my eyes off them for a second. But somehow they vanished, presumably into the craft. And now, as Ed watched the craft, the strange red emblem on the side of it suddenly vanished. The craft then rose slowly and silently upwards to a height of about 20 feet, and then, quote, in a blink, it was gone from view. Either it disappeared or it flew away so fast he could not track it." So Ed was naturally astonished and waited for about 10 minutes to see if anything else would happen, and when nothing occurred, he returned to his motorbike and began to push it home. This is when he immediately noticed that part of the leather seat had been ripped off, and the petrol cap was missing. There was also a strange silvery powder all over the seat. Since he did not see this happen, and he certainly was in a position to, it looks like there may have been some missing time here. After he got home, he had the presence of mind to collect some of this silvery powder and preserve it in a plastic bag, and he washed the rest of it off. This encounter upset him so much that shortly later he sold the motorbike and did his best to forget about the whole thing. He told nobody about it, not his wife or kids, but he says that he was unable to forget the account, and it was this that prompted him to send his first-hand report to BUFORA, the British UFO Research Association. And he sent his report along with the strange powdery substance that he had found on the seat of his motorcycle. Researcher Ron Sargent tried several times to follow up on the case, but Ed ultimately refused to talk to him. Nevertheless, Ron did go to the location and learned that there were a number of chemical factories adjacent to where the encounter occurred. This could be a factor, as we know UFOs are attracted to technological installations. Now, researcher Ron Sargent also found tank-like structures that were similar in appearance to the craft that Ed describes. This made him wonder if perhaps Ed had seen one of these tanks and thought perhaps it was a craft. The problem with this is the tanks are not actually visible from the street, and while similar, they are by no means identical. They do not have the symbols on the side. They're not quite exactly like Ed described. And of course, nor does this explain the two strange men, or the powdery substance, or Ed seeing this craft take off. Now, he did submit the strange powdery substance to a preliminary chemical analysis, which showed that it was composed of a magnesium or aluminum base, similar to that used for collecting fingerprints. Except the problem with that is that substance is usually composed of zinc and aluminum. Ultimately, they decided not to move forward with a more expensive analysis. Now, another curious detail, of course, was the emblem described by Ed. Both the craft he described and the emblem on its side bear a striking resemblance to the very famous Socorro, New Mexico craft seen by Lonnie Zamora. So there are some questions regarding this case which were never fully investigated due to the fact that Ed refused further interviews. Nevertheless, editor Jenny Randall writes, "The case has an air of credibility about it, which is evident to any reader of his letter." Such a shame that the witness declined to be formally interviewed. I certainly can't blame him. He made it clear that this was an incident he wants to basically forget and not talk about. But it sounds like an important case to me, if only because of the incredible similarities to the Lonnie Zamora case in Socorro, New Mexico. I mean, the craft is almost identical. Certainly the beings are not. Very, very strange that they looked like two vicars. I just can't imagine there's two vicars piloting a spaceship and that these are ETs. I don't know, perhaps this was a case of reverse engineering and these are human pilots. Hard to say. I certainly don't think that the witness saw these tanks that were nearby, which are strikingly similar to what he saw, because clearly he saw this craft take off up into the sky, and the tanks don't do that. So I don't know, it's one of those weird cases. Also, the physical evidence, I think, speaks to its veracity, but what unusual physical evidence that is. Such a shame that that weird gray powder wasn't subjected to more analysis, because that might have provided some interesting answers. But yeah, we did get a preliminary analysis, which turned out to be quite unusual. All right, let's move to the next case, which I call "I was studied like a guinea pig." What an unusual case this is. This one took place one evening in August 1976 in Lanús, Argentina. And it's a really profound case with all kinds of interesting details to it, including one that I've never heard before. This case has received almost no publicity. As far as I know, it has only been published in the December 21, 1990 issue of the Argentine magazine La Voz, and was picked up in the spring 1992 issue of the Flying Saucer Review. The researchers are Daniel O. Sanchez, and the other researcher I only know his initials, which are JCV. The witness is Ricardo Ali, a restaurant owner. At the time of his encounter, he was a 20-year-old store worker and student at night school. One night in August 1976, he was asleep in the bedroom of his home at General 3250 in East Lanús, Buenos Aires, Argentina. He had gone to sleep shortly after 11:30 p.m. And I'll just let Ricardo describe what happened. As he says, "I estimate that some 2 or 2.5 hours may have passed when I started to hear a very deep but high-pitched noise. It was something like the buzzing of a wasp, amplified about 1,000 times. It was becoming louder each time, and the sound entered my ears and seemed to make me sleepy. In spite of its intensity, the humming, it did not hurt me. It was just as if it was robbing me of my willpower." So Ricardo obviously knew that something very unusual was happening to him, but he didn't understand what, and there was little he could do but wait and see. And as he says, "I saw flashes in my room. light beams of undefinable colors, until I entered a strange state, like some kind of trance. I could see, feel, hear, but I was incapable of moving. In a superhuman effort, I tried to get up, but when I tried to, I seemed to lose all my strength. It was impossible for me to move in any way, or to scream. But something was telling me that nothing would happen, and I was not frightened. The room was very warm, and an internal voice, like I never heard before, invaded me. So events now escalated to a whole new level as apparent extraterrestrials appeared in Ricardo's room. As he says, "It was then that I saw them. They appeared from nowhere, as if they had come out of the same light that flooded my room. They were three beings dressed in silvery suits. Two of them were men. The third one was a woman, the most beautiful you could imagine. She was perfect. I don't remember the men's faces. All I know is they were men. The woman had very deep eyes. They all looked at me and talked to me, but didn't move their lips. It's as if they entered my mind through their eyes and discovered all my secrets." So Ricardo had no idea who these people were or why they were in his room, but he was about to find out. As he says, "The two men by my side didn't seem to intervene. They were simply looking at me. A step behind them was the woman. For a minute I felt completely faint. I couldn't estimate precise time when I came to, but the woman was there by my side. She bent over me and passed her hands over my face and all over my body, caressing it, but keeping her hands at a distance of some 30 centimeters, that's 11 inches. She didn't touch my body, but I could feel the caresses and the warmth of her hands. A few minutes later, I felt a sexual contact with that woman, in spite of her being apart from me, and her never having touched me. Again, I felt faint, and once again I heard the intense humming of the wasp until it became slower and quieter. Now this proved to be the end of the encounter, and Ricardo fell asleep or passed out. As Ricardo says, when I woke up the next morning, I felt great. I tried to analyze what happened, and I asked my mother if she had heard anything. Pondering about it, I searched for a more logical explanation and thought it had simply been a dream, until some years later I verified that it hadn't been so. But that is another story, another event that happened to me afterwards, which I will tell you about. Unfortunately, Ricardo did not share this later event, which apparently confirmed this earlier encounter, which he is now certain did really happen. As he says, "What I don't see, I don't believe." There's a question nowadays whether extraterrestrials do exist or not. I think some people believe they don't. Others believe in the real possibility that unidentified flying objects fly around in the sky. But which is the truth? I leave it up to you. A somewhat strange event happened to me. I can assure you that even I had my doubts at the beginning. I kept it to myself for a long time because I feared ridicule. But the years and other events made me see the truth. I believe that I really had an encounter with people from other galaxies. I was studied like a guinea pig. But I assure you that they know us better than what you think. I lived it, and I can assure you it's so. You can tell that that witness was affected very profoundly and that it was quite difficult for him to process his encounter. So my heart goes out to him. I think that's true for the vast majority of people who have this kind of experience. It's life-changing. I really do wish he had provided more information about his second encounter, because it sounds like that one really gave him a lot of clarity regarding his first encounter. And it sounds like it was also very extensive. Fortunately, there was no follow-up that I could find on that case, but certainly interesting. I mean, I've never heard that detail before of a witness being subjected to an exam that's very much like Reiki almost, with the ET putting her hands over the person's body, and he can physically feel it. So unusual. And despite the fact that he says he felt that he was being studied like a guinea pig, I get the impression that he felt that this was ultimately a benevolent encounter for him. An amazing and important and certainly an obscure case. Now let's move to the next one. This one is also pretty short, but I'm guessing you haven't heard it before. I love finding these obscure cases. I call this one, What the Old Farmer's Wife Saw. This one occurred on July 20, 1995 in Varpasalo, Finland. It's a pretty unusual case in some ways and typical in others. There are quite a few cases of people just wandering along through a rural area and they come upon a landed UFO and a humanoid, and that's what we're seeing in this case. This case comes from Mervi Virtanen of FUFOR, the Finnish UFO Research Organization. It's a brief incident, but still, I think, an important addition to the catalog of humanoid cases. The witness is unnamed and anonymous and is known only as, quote, an old farmer's wife, so I'll just call her Helena. It was around 3 p.m. on July 19 or 20, 1995, that Helena ventured from her home in Varpasalo, Raikaila, Finland, to go pick strawberries in the forest. She went to a familiar spot where she knew the strawberries grew, and as she approached this location, she heard a faint noise, kind of like a shotgun. She heard it again and then a third time, but she just ignored these noises. However, as she came closer to the strawberry patch, she saw a giant-sized blue object with a dome shape, kind of like an umbrella appearance, complete with ribbed sections. She said it was rising slightly and then descending, and it finally hovered about 1 foot above the ground. And as it descended, she said she could hear a soft sighing noise coming from it. This object, which was clearly a craft of some kind, was amazing enough. But it was the male, human-looking figure standing about 3 feet away from the craft that really caught her attention. The man wore a dark green jumpsuit with a broad belt, and he was bent over and appeared to be picking objects up from the ground and throwing them into the vessel, presumably through an opening in the side. Helena figured that the man must be collecting pieces of ore, as there were many mines in the area. Furthermore, she could hear a sort of pinging sound every time the man threw something into the craft. At one point the man stood up, but then he continued his activity of tossing small stones into the craft. He did not seem to see Helena, who continued to watch this man for about 10 minutes, after which time she felt like she might be disturbing the strange man's work, and she felt a strong, compulsive urge to leave. The man and his craft were still there when she turned around and went home. She did look for other vehicles around the area, but did not see any. Finally arriving home, Helena's daughter-in-law could see that something had happened to her and asked Helena about it. Helena proceeded to share her story, and about 2 hours later, the two of them hiked back to this strawberry patch. The man and the craft were still gone, but they could now see a faint impression on the ground where the craft had hovered, and over the next few months, Helena felt repeated compulsions to keep visiting this site, and each time she returned, she could see that the vegetation where the craft had hovered was slowly withering away, and in a matter of months, the vegetation at the spot was almost black. She did point it out to UFO investigators who went to that spot the following spring, and they found 5 black spots still visible on the ground. And 1 full year later, the ground where the craft had hovered was still lifeless of all vegetation. This to me feels like a sort of incidental encounter. By that I mean somewhat random. It doesn't look like this lady was guided to the ETs or that they intended to be seen, or the ET I should say, there was just one of them. And she kind of just stumbled upon this craft in the forest and this ET doing whatever he was doing. She did mention that there were a number of mines in this area, so perhaps that's a factor here. I did a whole episode on UFOs and ETs who show great interest in mines all over the world. Gold mines, silver mines, copper mines, uranium mines, you name it. So that definitely does seem to be a draw for ETs in some cases. And it sounds like that's what was going on here, given that the ET was collecting samples from the ground and throwing them into his craft. It's weird to me that he didn't notice the witness. He must have. I find it just really hard to believe that he didn't see her. looking at him for, almost 15 minutes. So I don't know, maybe he just ignored her. It's possible. Very interesting also that she returned back to the site and found these landing traces, which were verified by UFO researchers. So that, I think, makes this an important case. All right, moving on to the last and final case in this compilation. This is also one of my favorite. It's really unusual. It's a multiple witness case. It's quite touching. There's physiological effects. The witness is incredibly well known, a very credible witness. So I think that all of this makes this a pretty important case. I call this one, He Looked Like a Grasshopper. This one occurred one evening in March 1997, though technically there are a number of events surrounding this case which are clearly connected to it. This occurred at Boracay Beach in Brazil. I want to give a shout out to Chico for referring this case to me, for bringing it to my attention. Thank you. An amazing case which I think you will find incredibly interesting. This case comes from researcher Osmar de Freitas, and it was published also in the book E.T.s in Brazil by Antonio Falero and in Humanoids Among Us by Alberto Rosales. But most of the information presented here comes from interviews given by the two witnesses on various Portuguese language videos. In March 1997, the primary witness, Celso Vendramini, a prominent, successful, and very well-known attorney, and his wife Sonia and their children were staying at a guest house located on Boracay Beach in Sao Paulo, Brazil. The whole time they were there, almost every night, they kept seeing strange lights in the sky. Then, one evening while taking a walk, Celso and a friend noticed a strange, dome-shaped glowing object sitting on the beach off in the distance. After a few moments it disappeared, so they became quite curious about it. Not really knowing much about UFOs, they didn't think too much of it. But around 1 a.m., Celso and his wife Sonia decided to take a walk along the beach to see if they could get a closer look at the weird lights that they kept seeing. So they left the guest house and walked along the beach. They brought along two puppies with them who belonged to the caretaker of the inn where they were staying. Sonia carried a flashlight. And it was shortly after they began their walk, the two puppies started barking and growling, looking over at the ocean and running back and forth. So they were clearly detecting something. And this is when Celso and Sonia began to hear a strange noise. As Celso says, suddenly an ambient noise began, kind of like a buzzing bee. We couldn't hear the sea anymore. The little dogs were barking, going back and forth, and seemed scared, kind of cornered, because they were going in that direction and then reversing. So Celso turned to his wife and said, "What the heck is that dog doing?" They shone their flashlight around, and to their amazement, about 150 feet in front of them was a very strange humanoid, clearly not human. As Celso says, it was a tall being, more than 2 meters in height, a head disproportionate to the body. He was so thin. His arms went past his knees. He was skinny, very skinny, extremely skinny. He looked like a grasshopper. Now this being was wearing a glossy, kind of mustard yellow colored jumpsuit, and Celso whispered to his wife, "What is that?" And she replied, "I don't know." As this figure drew closer, they saw that it was actually floating a few inches above the sand. Behind the figure, they saw silhouettes of smaller figures moving back and forth, but it was too dark to discern any real detail. The strange humanoid, however, was close enough to see very clearly. In fact, they turned off the flashlight because it was a moonlit night, and they could see this being clearly. As Celso says, he was walking as if he was not touching the ground. He was levitating. Suddenly we were shining our lights on him. He stopped and turned to face us, and I turned and I said, "Woman, what is that?" Then he started coming towards us. Alarmed by the strange appearance of the figure, seeing that it was not human and seeing that it was approaching them, Celso quickly grabbed the pistol that he carried with him. As he says, "I was scared of it. I pulled the pistol from my back. He came closer. Then I cocked the pistol and went to lower the hammer, the trigger, I was kind of nervous at the time, and my finger bumped it, and the pistol ended up firing between me and my wife. It hit the ground. It almost hit her foot, actually, poor thing. She got a huge fright. I was also scared by the noise of the shot. I also jumped. And when that explosion happened, since it was so dark, it lit up, and that being disappeared. The noise disappeared too. So looking up, they did see a very large ship in the sky which quickly flew away. And during all this time, they also noticed a heavy woman wearing a black swimsuit walking a short distance away. In fact, she was close enough that Celso and Sonia believed that she must have seen this alien humanoid. So they wondered if perhaps the woman was being taken or that she might be one of the ETs herself. They were pretty shaken up by the strange encounter, so after exploring a little bit longer, they returned back to the house. But events weren't over yet, because not long after this, Sonia woke up in the middle of the night and felt something pulling her. And as she roused herself to full consciousness, she saw that she was lying down on a table surrounded by several small gray beings who appeared to be operating on her head. She felt as though the beings were opening up her head and placing some kind of implant inside. That was her impression. She felt no pain at all, but she did mentally hear one of the beings say, "Close her head tightly." She was unable to move during all this time. She woke up the next morning and shared the encounter, which she wondered if it might be a dream. But sometime later she had another one of these, quote, dreams, and in this one she saw this being touching her neck. And the next morning she was suffering from some neck pain, and examining her neck, they found 3 red dots in a triangular pattern. And this convinced her that the, quote, dreams of being examined by ETs were in fact real. Now, despite all these amazing events, Celso ultimately believes the beings do not mean them any harm. As Celso says, "I feel today that being appeared on the beach for us. He was not going to harm us. He did not go to do us harm. At no time was there any sign of aggression or anything, and today I have a certainty that they are our brothers." So there must have been something going on in this area for there to be so much UFO activity. And then this couple goes out on a walk looking to find UFOs, and sure enough they come upon this, what appears to be a gray or perhaps mantid type ET. And it approached them. The witness, it's interesting to me, now says that he regrets reacting the way he did, pulling out his gun, because as he says, he does not think the ETs were aggressive or harmful, even though his wife later did apparently have an on-board encounter. So a truly fascinating case in so many different ways. I can only imagine what it must be like to be walking on the beach at night and have something like that approach you. Also, another really interesting aspect to this case was the large woman in the black bathing suit who was apparently part of this encounter in some way. Whether she was being taken herself, was working with the ETs, or was one of the ETs remains an open question. But it's certainly unusual, and another one of those high strangeness details that makes cases like these so hard to understand. So there you go. 7 humanoid cases from all over the world. It's mind-boggling how many cases there are like this. It's equally mind-boggling to me that all the attention that's being paid to this subject in official circles right now is pretty much ignoring all the cases like these. And it's not 100, it's not 1,000, it's closer to 10,000. I would say it's probably more accurate, 100,000 that have been recorded. And we all know that most people who see a humanoid don't report it. So we're looking at probably millions of cases like these. So there you go. I hope you learned something with this episode. I really want to thank you for watching. I truly appreciate it. And until next time, keep asking those hard questions, keep searching for the truth, and most important of all, keep having fun. And I will see you next time for another episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Bye for now.